Hello, I'm Michael Weatherly, and today on Pulling the Thread, we are so fortunate to have with us Mr. Elvis Mitchell, film critic extraordinaire, a man whose career has spanned decades, somebody who could be called a poet, could be called a raconteur. I just call him my friend. So let's get into the beautiful complexity of cinema with Elvis Mitchell. Thank you for coming and being involved in this little exploration of ideas and themes, thoughts.
Wow, you're really warning me off this exploration.
It's
Ma,
an
is that usually
exploration.
time for school? Okay, well,
How did you get into movies? And I wonder, because mine was college. I mean, I knew about cinema in Westport, Connecticut, Fairfield. Like I saw Indiana Jones in the theater, but I saw E.T., but I wasn't like looking at Abbott and Costello on Channel 11 in New York. But what was the way in for you? I'm kind of curious.
I guess it was kind of always there. This weird thing happened when I was a kid. We moved into this house. I remember going to this attic on Christmas, just because, there's that great line from that old song about everything but the girl. Everything's like Christmas Day without you. It's cold and there's nothing to do. So Christmas afternoon, there's nothing to do. I'll go into this attic and open this steamer trunk. And it's full of old issues of the New Yorker back in the days when they didn't sign talk to the town. And the current cinema had all these capsule reviews. And I thought, oh my gosh, one person saw all these movies, and these are all movies I've never heard of before. And well, I should see some of these things. I just kind of always loved movies and was aware of the effect that movies had on me. And so I just sort of became this hobby that took over my life. Just and I always wanted to be surprised, but there was information about movies everywhere. I was a comics reader as a kid. I remember in Stan Lee's soapbox, he had a mention of a filmmaker. He mentioned Fellini and Alain Resnais. I thought I should try to find out who these guys are if Stan Lee likes them, because that must mean something. And saw 8.5, and I thought, this has nothing to do with Spider-Man, but I guess it's okay. And all these things, because you see one movie and it sort of triggers an interest in somebody else. And as kids, we had all this access to things that weren't on Turner Classic Movies, so they weren't, what's the word they use nowadays, curated. So you could just see anything. You'd see the Philadelphia Story. You see this other Cary Grant movie, Amazing Adventures. You think he did everything. He did all kinds of things. And you see None But the Lonely Heart, and you go, oh my God, he could be a dramatic actor too.
Or Penny
And
Serenade, right? And
oh
that was,
gosh, yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
But
Yeah,
it's
but he,
interesting. So you just pointed something out. I was talking to Chris Jackson about point of entry, like angle of entry into a passion. And Chris Jackson, who was uh, grew up in Southern Illinois, like near Tennessee, and like Metropolis, Illinois, and his mother was a vocal coach. And so Chris Jackson, when you are sitting there watching him play George Washington on stage in Hamilton, and he's doing this giant singing, he's moving everybody, or into the Heights or wherever, Chris was in The Lion King. He has been a Broadway fixture for 20 years, but that, that doesn't just come around because one day he was like, oh, maybe I'll try that. He, his earliest memories are singing in a church, and his mother like bringing him into the church and saying, you're going to sing here. And so almost before he could read, he was that's what he saw. Those were the patterns in his imagination. They were vocal patterns, and that's how he expressed himself. It's interesting to me that you, first of all, have this treasure trove box. Like what a magical thing to open. It's like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But you open up this thing, but your angle of entry is through the written word, which when it's a visual medium like film that's an interesting way to come into, and becoming a critic yourself. Do you think that that's true, in the sense of that the first voice you heard was sort of the opinion of the movie? Or
I think it was also these, again, this sort of entryway to these things I didn't know about, and that sort of compact of information at the front of the magazine, which had comments on galleries and on theater and on live music being played in clubs around the city. And that sort of, to me, triggered the kind of New York you saw in the movies, where in those 30s and 40s movies, people were always going out and they're always doing things. And movies seemed to me to be an entryway into that world of all those things, and to have of an experience that wasn't mine. And I was always curious about that. And I think I just developed an early love for actors, watching them do all kinds of things. And also when I was a kid too, because in Detroit, not far from the ironically named Metropolis, Illinois, we were, there's lots of theater. The Newlanders own theaters in Detroit, so school groups would go to see plays, and you see actors on stage. And I take the playbills home, and some of these actors were touring with these shows, and I see them in movies. I just thought, these people are doing all kinds of things, and not just one thing, just not just one kind of performance. And that really fascinated me because I want to know more about it. And I think there was a kind of, it was, I inadvertently ended up discovering this person who had this big impact on my life and my career, and that was Pauline Kael, who was a film critic in the New Yorker, and
Mhm.
had probably written a bunch of those capsules I was reading at that age, and thought I connected with not just opinion, but the power of rhetoric, and how evocative the writing was. And I just thought I wanted to be able to see movies in this way and to experience them in this way. And I don't know if it was this way for you, but at a certain point you almost feel like these kinds of things are this kind of atoll, these islands that call out to you, that are places that are unlike anything in your general area, and you just want to get out to them and explore them. So I couldn't see as much theater, obviously, as you could see in New York, but whenever I could, I try to go see actors work, and like to think about the way they work in the theater, live theater, versus seeing them in a movie, having no idea what a director did and how the directors are controlling the performance. But that all fascinated me. And I wonder, you had a similar thing too, getting to see live actors at an early age, that
Yeah.
ignited some fire in you.
So, what's interesting? When I dropped out of college to become an actor, but I didn't really know. I was not a theater major at American University. I mean, I was a disaster major, is what I was. But I was a caterwauling, endless. I mean, I would wake up in the morning, light myself on fire, and run across the campus until, I exhausted myself. I think they call that ADHD now, but I was having a really hard time making sense of the world around me. But I always gravitated, even when I was away at boarding school, to the arts department. I always went, whether it was the sculpting class or the drawing class or the music class or the drama black box theater or the main stage production. I was always sniffing around. But I couldn't, uh, I would audition for things and I could never get in because I couldn't memorize anything properly. Um, and
Really?
I had a really difficult time memorizing things properly. And then with music, I had a very difficult time playing. Um, I wanted to play by feel. But I couldn't play the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, as the notated music would have you do. I always wanted to sort of give my own little, twirling little mustache to a phrase, or punk something out, or if I thought it was a little corny, call attention, hang a light on how corny a phrase was. Um, so I think the biggest thing I ever did was, Babes in Arms. I think I had one song, I Wish I Were in Love Again, and it was a disaster. Um, that poor girl, Shake Hasselman, and I say girl, but she was 15, watching me just die on stage. And so there was no one in my life that was like, Weatherly, as my father said to me not too long ago, he said, Michael, you have had some success. And I said, gee, thanks, Dad. It's a lot to hear that from your father. And he goes, no one saw that coming. No one saw you coming.
I want to ask you this because I've heard so many stories from actors about how terrifying it was to do soap opera because, you didn't get retakes. You had to go there and know the monologue. And I remember on The Tonight Show, Wayne Rogers, a name from the past, talked about being on a live New York, being on a soap opera. And that he had like spent the weekend getting drunk or something. And he had a big monologue on Monday to sort of, bring people up to speed as what had happened the previous week in those days before
Those were
VCRs.
Mondays. Oh yeah, those were
Yes.
Mondays.
So he said that he got there early, slept. No, he got there early. There was a flat behind the bar where he's going to be doing this monologue. So he went to the makeup table and got a mascara pencil and wrote all his dialogue on the flat. Went and tried to sleep off his hangover for 2 hours. Came to, threw some cold water in his face so his pores were tightened. Sat down, looked up for the live soap opera, and the wall was gone. So he just went, well, as you know, oh, God, I'm choking a peanut. I'll be right back. He walked out of the studio and started his career as an investment banker because he's convinced he'd never be an actor after he choked literally on live TV.
And he became Peter Falk, and he handled a lot of people's money.
Yeah, but was that hard? Because you talked about having a hard time with dialogue. Was that hard doing that stuff? I mean, you weren't doing it in the days of live TV, obviously. But
okay, did I tell you my Aaron Sorkin one?
No.
So I had a deal back. I don't know if they still do the holding deals, but back in the 90s, I had this holding deal at Warner Brothers. And what that means is that they would pay you a certain amount of money to hold you from booking other jobs. So Warner Brothers was like, well, at some point we want Michael Weatherly to be in something that we make. And it ended up being a sitcom called Jessie with Christina Applegate that, that was, I learned you don't want to play a bad guy on a sitcom in prime time because you get yelled at. But anyway, I get brought in for this thing called West Wing. And I read the thing, and it's Sam Seaborn is the part. So I go in, and I'm reading for all the biggies at Warner Brothers, and the head of casting, and Aaron is there, and I think his name was Toby Jonas, who was the head of the studio at the time. And big room, these are big rooms. I had just met with Brooke Shields when she was doing her sitcom. Suddenly Susan, because that young actor had committed suicide or had died in Vegas. Replaced. So that was sort of a ghoulish audition to try and go and replace somebody. I was very glad that I didn't get that job because it would have been so hard to just walk in. I don't know who ultimately did that job, but I'm sitting there and and I love this script. I mean, West Wing, I read it like 10 times. It was fantastic. And I just thought, oh my God, I can't believe this. Like, I am going to kill this audition dead. There's going to be nothing left of anybody in this room. So I had come up with, and I'd written in the margins all my funny little ad libs and all my stuff that I was going to do. And I let her rip, and I started going right into it. And I started like right there, full Sam Seaborn. And a guy who knows he's a hot shot. He's a White House guy. I get interrupted about 4 lines in. Sorry, hold on. Do you need time to look at the material? Because and I was like, oh, well, and I didn't know that it was Aaron Sorkin. I was just like, oh, who's the floppy haired guy who seems to be on mushrooms? No, that's not true. That wasn't till he got to the airport. So anyway, I mean, it goes without saying that guy knows absolutely what he's doing. But as I learned with Glenn Gordon Caron of Moonlighting, Medium, and Bull renown, there are certain writers that write this stuff down, and it's like it's etched in stone. It is the way it will be done. The ellipses is not a semicolon, is not a comma, is not a, this is not a dash. These punctuation marks are there for, so I screwed the pooch on that one, but it led me to meeting James Cameron and screen testing for him a little while later. And it turned out that audition, which Chick Egley, who had kind of come up through the, I think the Botchko world.
And worked with Glenn Cairn on Moonlighting.
Yes, but Chick was a little looser with stuff and was more interested in what you were going to bring to it. And Jim was not as interested in the words as he was in the way that felt and looked. And so they were less didactic, and it wasn't classical music, there was a little bit more Sonny Rollins allowed in the span of the thing. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I knew that Jessica Alba was an extraordinarily beautiful young woman who, like, distractingly so, really. I mean, there is something about an energy in a room. And I had to play this guy who was doing a push-pull and kind of a tease and kind of like a 3-card Monty on the street corner with the facts and what he knew about her and all that stuff. And I was just in a confident enough space where I could do it, where I turned a corner and I booked that job. I was surprised I booked it, but I think that was the Last Days of Disco was a job that got me something on my resume that allowed me to get into some other rooms.
Was Whit like that too? Did you have to know his dialogue as well? Was he pretty?
Well, he let me ad lib.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And that was very unusual.
Yes.
Yeah, but I don't know, he found me strangely amusing, I guess. The first ad lib that I did is we were walking up to the door and we were FBI. It was at the end of the movie, and there's the bouncer at the door, and it's, sunrise or whatever. And I'm coming up with all my federal agents, and I hold up my badge and I go, I think we're on the list, which was not in the script. And Whit just thought, oh yeah, that's great, because my character had gone into the club before through the back door because they weren't on the list and they got rejected from the front door. So it like tied in, and so it made sense to him. But I'm curious, did you have a moment where you felt the tumblers in the safe clicking for you into a career where you could take like these curiosities and passions that you had, and did it suddenly congeal into this thing where you were like, oh, I'm going to have my name, I'm going to have a byline?
Well, I want to make sure we're recording this because I don't think anybody's used the word career in the sentence with me before. So thank you for saying that. I never imagined. I thought of just having this conversation a couple of days ago. I thought if I was lucky, I'd get through law school and I'd be able to go and make a living. But always did other stuff. Like people always knew I was interested in movies. And when I was in school, I got a job because I was in school and I quit and I went back. I didn't have a scholarship anymore. So to pay my way through school. And I got a job at a public radio station, and they knew I was interested in movies. They said, well, we don't have a film critic anymore, and you seem to like movies. How much they thought of it, this 20-year-old kid, you seem to like movies. Why don't you go and be our film critic? And for me, the concept of being able to go to a movie before other people saw it for free.
Wow.
How does this happen? And then I started going to screenings, and it was just unbelievable to me. And
what about meeting filmmakers? Like, do you remember the first kind of entry point with meeting those guys?
I can tell you the first filmmaker I ever met, because I was going to interview him for the radio station. I got set up with an interview with George Miller, which he still remembers.
Wow. So what vividly was before Mad Max for George Miller?
Nothing. This is for the Road Warrior, which is the
Road
second
Warrior,
movie.
right? Which we call right.
And we were talking. We started talking about Bruno Bettelheim, Uses of Enchantment, and I was one of these people who had seen, Mad Max, and I said, "Why do they all sound like airline pilots in the movie?" He goes, "Oh, because they dubbed it." Because the initial release of Mad Max, because they thought that Mel Gibson's accent would be indecipherable to Americans, Roger Corman, in fact, they
Right.
dubbed everybody and gave them American accents. So that didn't abate the power of the movie at all. And these all guys terrible. And we just ended up talking. It was supposed to be a 20-minute interview at this restaurant. We talked for an hour and a half. And I
Were
just
you
thought,
the one who said you should do the one about the talking pig?
he should do that. You should tell him that, because that's a great idea. But we were just talking, and he was telling me all these weird Mel Gibson stories. And he said, I knew that Mel Gibson was a movie star because the second day of shooting, he stopped asking me what I thought and asked the DP what he thought. This guy's going to be a movie star. Even though he also said he was clearly a very, as he put it, he's a very complicated person. But it never occurred to me that I would get a chance to talk to a filmmaker. I remember he was wearing two different wristwatches because he had one on US time, whatever times when he would be in, and one on Australian time. So he knew what the time was back home. And he was talking about having trained as a doctor. And it was just this conversation I never imagined I would get to have with somebody like that. And this was only his second movie, and we were talking about all this stuff. And I thought, I remember having this feeling like I can hold my own in this kind of conversation. It never occurred to me that I would be able to do that. And having this store of movies I'd seen, but also having all these other interests, having read, Robert Warshaw and so much other stuff about sort of disentangling cultural phenomena, all stuff he was fascinated by. You go, Bettelheim, I'm going to write that down. Bruno Bettelheim, The Uses of Enchantment. I said, yeah. And then there's also the Freud essays and the essay, The Uncanny and the Unconscious. He goes, Freud. And so I never felt I would be in a conversation with somebody who made made a couple movies, and be able to say things that he would respond to. It felt to me like that was a door opening. And it might be possible for me to do this. I had no idea how I could ever do this in a way that would provide, as you put it, a career, but that fascinated me. And then when I finished school, I got a job because I was writing freelance reviews for a local newspaper. The TV critic quit. And in those days, it was hard to get film critics jobs because everybody was kind of this young fogey who wanted to be like Andrew Saris, and I couldn't have been less interested in that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it was turning movies into, the Dead Sea Scrolls and this living thing that they were for me. And I couldn't get work as a film critic anywhere. So I started writing about television. It was television at this period when things were really starting to change. It was a TV period
like
of Miami Vice.
Hill Street Blues.
No, it was Miami Vice and Saint Elsewhere. I mean, what I think of as being this real wave of what, to my mind, was a golden age of television, and Glenn Caron doing Moonlighting, and the world being different. And in the case of Miami Vice, somebody treating the TV screen as it were a film screen, and using contemporary popular music, not just the weird knockoffs you would hear in TV shows like The White Shadow. They have these bad covers of pop songs because they didn't want to pay the extra $500. And that felt to me also like another door opening, because it was this way of saying that TV and film weren't that far apart. And I kept having moments like this over the course of my again, career. I'm going to use that word advisedly here, but I remember ended up going, I was a film critic at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram for 2 years. I never lived there. I would go there for 1 week out of the month and write remotely. And I would go in for 1 week, and Saving Private Ryan was coming. And so they sent me on something I knew I never wanted to do, a junket. I've only done 2 junkets in my life. I thought I'll get a chance to talk to Spielberg and maybe Tom Hanks. And that was Tom Hanks' first interview of the day. And at this point, I was the entertainment critic for Weekend Edition on NPR. And we started talking. He's kind of doing a Tom Hanks talk show act. And he listens to my voice. He's like, oh, you're the guy from Weekend Edition. And his demeanor changed. And suddenly we started having this conversation. And they come into Deep Sixes thing after 20 minutes. He goes, no, we're going to have a little extra time. And then we were talking for and this is a long time in junket time, 40 minutes. And then I go to talk to Matt Damon, and I said, you should play Mark the Bird Frederick. He goes, oh my God, I just bought his life rights. I'm going to do that movie. I'm working out so I can do that. I'm getting in shape to do this. And we have all these connections. And then because of Spielberg, I didn't get any time. I think it was one of these things they called, you must have done these are round robin, where a bunch of people sit around and throw questions at you. I can see the look on your face now of PTSD that you've had something like this in your career.
Yes.
And
That was, I remember doing one for Dark Angel where Jim Cameron was on a screen. Jessica and I were on stage, and Jim was on a screen behind us being satellite videoed in from like somewhere in Papua New Guinea, where he was on a boat looking for some sort of, rare barnacle or something. And we're doing and so there's a time delay. So it's constantly awkward, and everyone is deeply respectful of the captain of the Titanic. And a man who changed in one, I guess you would call it financial quarter. He changed the meaning of a word. People used to say Titanic until the Titanic sank, meaning ginormous. It is Titanic. It is something of great size and volume. This is a Titanic expedition. And then the Titanic sank. And for 70 whatever years, it was, if you used the word Titanic, it meant fucking disaster. Titanic lost all true meaning. And James Cameron in one financial quarter, Q3, I guess it would have been. I don't know when that movie came out, but so everyone was so deep.
Yes, it was
everybody was so respectful of him even during that time. So there was a lot of white glove sort of treatment and kid glove treatment, but very, very soft handling of the whole enterprise, right? No one was saying what they thought. So someone finally said to Jessica, how do you feel? And this is that round robin thing you're talking about. How do you feel about being cast in this? And she leaned back and crossed her legs and she goes, I know. Can you fucking believe I'm the lead of this thing? The whole room. And then Jim just started laughing like some sort of Orwellian Oz on this giant screen, because he thought she was a hoot, and she is, I'm sure. I don't know her anymore. But to the extent that James Cameron is a human being, I have met him in real life, but mostly he's on a giant screen in my imagination. But yeah, those round robin things, I would not imagine that that's where you really shine.
Well, I just wanted to go and see. I wasn't even taking notes or recording because I just thought nothing is going to come of this. So people were just asking questions. I just said to him, I remember you did a Name of the Game episode, LA 2017. It's a swish pan that I thought was one of the most incredible things I ever saw. He went, wait, what? I said, LA 2017. He goes, yeah, I know what it is, but do you remember that shot? I went, yeah, of course I remember that shot. And years later, I was doing an event at Lapham with Matt Damon. He goes, it's funny because I don't know if you remember when we met. I said, oh, I remember. He goes, yeah, because he said usually if you're doing those things, you're so exhausted, you just go and have your lunch of French onion soup, and nobody talks to anybody during lunch because you're just so sick of hearing your own voice. But he said, did you guys talk to this guy, Elvis Mitchell? I go, yeah. I went, so I made this breakthrough. And I just, because I think of myself still as being this kid from Detroit who has no business doing this, or for that matter, being on whatever the Zoom is this called. So that whenever I get these opportunities, I just always thought, ask what I want to know. Because you've done a lot of interviews. I always have thought the only thing you can do in an interview is to pay the person the compliment of taking their work seriously. You don't have to be serious with them, but you have to take what they've done seriously. So I understand that there might be an exchange of information. I've never thought I was going to be anybody's friend or anything. I just wanted to go and also maybe try to do that thing where you make them pay attention to you. Because you can see it looking at us, yeah, so I guess I'll have this soup. If I get done this in time, I can maybe go catch part of the game. What time's the car going to pick me up? and to make them make eye contact with you.
Well,
And so
one of the things that you, I don't know if where it came from, how you came up with it, but I'm sure people talk to you all about this. But we're here talking with Elvis Mitchell and his careerist objectives as we swim past these atolls, searching for meaning in the chaos of film round robins. Let's return to Elvis. You do that thing where you do it like a kind of kickback summary of you synthesize what someone has just said, and it doesn't matter if it's um, whoever it is you're interviewing. You've paid them, to your point, the compliment and the respect of paying attention to what they've said and also thinking about what they've said so that you when you synthesize it and spin it back as a kind of parenthetical, for those of you just joining us, this is where we are, which is like old radio kind of shortcut, sort of like Monday morning on the soap opera where you got to give everyone the plot. But you're doing that service for your home audience, but you're also possibly taking the piss out of the person in front of you or giving them high respect. But if they take it the wrong way, because it's always a razor's edge, if people are narcissistic and particularly ill-tempered, you might think you're being funny and clever in one of your wraparounds. But have you ever had that happen when you go, we're here talking to Bradley Cooper about his sexuality and how playing the maestro mastermind allowed him to explore parts of himself, like, or whatever, like where you didn't obviously intend to do anything, but the way that it was heard and received, you found a bump in the interview. Because I'm kind of curious about bumps in interviews with you, because you're
gosh,
very smooth, but I can imagine that people get pissed off sometimes.
that has never happened, actually, because I think that here's like the things I do. One of the things I've always tried to do is to never sit in front of somebody. And I think we've even talked about this with notes, because when you have notes in front of you, people are looking at your notes. The way you see when you're going to look at your notes, it's not a conversation. And I wanted to, it may not even be a conversation, but I certainly want it to feel like one. And if you don't have notes, and I just did think of my show, I did a thing with the cast of my show, and Sarah Silverman, who I know a little bit, goes, "You were sitting out there without any notes or anything." I went, "How many times have you done this with me? I never use notes. I mean, there's no. It's got to feel a little bit to me like a high wire act, or else there's no fun in it. I mean, it's like anybody can sit with a list of questions." And the first time I was ever interviewed on KCRW was a friend of mine at a show, and we would talk, and so anyway, and go right back to the next question on the list. And I thought, I'm never going to do that, because that takes you out of what it is, and it certainly it becomes very specific, kind of goal oriented. I will answer the question and wait for the next one. And every once in a while, someone would go, "Was that a question?" I go, "I'm sorry, I thought we was going to make a conversation. I will ask you a question." And they would kind of chuckle about that. And it sometimes takes people a while to warm up to it not feeling like a job interview, because I don't want it to feel like that. And I'm glad we're getting a chance to look at each other, because the past few years since the pandemic, I've done the majority of my show interviews on Zoom, which I hate. Just
Yeah.
I hate not being able to read body language,
Yeah.
or you don't know if you're not seeing somebody, how they pause if you never talked to them before. Some people take a long time between thoughts, so you just have to wait
Warren
and
Beatty,
wait.
anybody? I remember watching, I think I told you Tom Snyder had Warren Beatty on in the late 90s on that, whatever, was it the Tomorrows? It was another version of Tomorrow, whatever it was that he was doing.
That was what's now called the Late Show.
Was it a late
That was the
late
Late Show.
show?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he was doing that with Tom. Yeah, he took
So,
over the show.
so we were talking about Beatty. So movie stars in the sort of Dick Wolfification, the Marvel universification of the 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 IP is the star. You're not you're not the star. And it's not a new thing. I mean, you know, the plays, The Thing, you know, I mean, it was always about the power of the vehicle. But people would still want to go and see a certain performer interpret that material, whatever it was. And it was the human touch of that performer's nuanced observations of whether it was Hamlet or whether it was, you know, the Philadelphia story, or, you know, whatever incarnation of a story, you know, Shakespeare to Barry. I went a long way, but it
You
seems
did.
like now, that has really taken over the IPification of um the industry, and nobody's trying to figure out how to make something greater than the sum of its parts. Nobody's trying to find that alchemy that Hitchcock, or, you know, anyone, like, you know, you go back to the very beginning of those silent movies, they understood that there was magic, that it was surreal, that it was a dreamscape, that we were tapping into a projection on not just a film being projected on celluloid, but a projection of your imagination and
Sure.
all your collective and conscious and unconscious.
Well,
And
well, something
so,
I it's the reason I started the documentary I made with this anecdote about my grandmother, because she was old enough to have gone to
oh
see the
yeah,
movies, to her first movie as a teenager, and she was aware of the way that movies changed the way she dreamed, which I thought was kind of an astonishing thing, because it's a luxury that probably nobody will ever have again, to be old enough to understand what your subconscious mind was like, and how this thing that you went to behold changed the way your life worked when you closed your eyes. And I think there is probably a lot of mistrust, that thing you're talking about, maybe from executives, maybe from filmmakers. Also, if you grow up seeing a certain kind of movie where you're not seeing people take their time, and you think of Tarantino as an anomaly. But I just remember talking to Jordan Peele about the first scene in Get Out, which is a wonder. It's a single take.
yeah,
And I said, I thought, such an incredible thing to do, because you don't see that very often in horror movies. And it's an interesting demand on the audience, because they subconsciously start to realize that they're squirmy and there's not a cut and what's going on. And he goes, that was just a last minute thing. We couldn't get the way we wanted to. We were losing the light. So I just decided to shoot as a single take. As he said, I just threw the dice. It was not a plan. I didn't plan it at all. But I love single takes. I mean, I remember having doing a conversation in front of an audience with Barry Levinson. And I said to him, you must get this all the time, but what I love about Diner is that the first shot is a single take. It introduces us to a character who, if we're paying attention, starts the movie and wraps the movie up. That's Paul Reiser. He walks into that party and the camera's following him around, so we meet everybody. He said, he just stopped. He said, I've been talking about this movie for 40 years. Nobody's ever asked me about the first shot in the movie, ever. Well, because I think people get, then they don't know. But that was important, because he said, you're right, it's a bookend. He's setting him up as an important character. And some part of you is maybe going to wonder subconsciously, well, why isn't he one of these guys? But he is important. He's just not part of that group. But he brings us, he is us. He is the audience surrogate. He's bringing us into that world. And then he actually has a point of view about what's happened at the end of the movie. So it's important to start the movie like that.
but
And
isn't that interesting? Because there are some iconic figures in that particular film, in Diner, right? Mickey Rourke, and like the discovery of Kevin Bacon in that world, and then the way that he builds the dichotomy of worlds, and this one's out of reach over here, and this one's over here, and he depicts that Baltimore world in it's so you believe everything about that story is real. That like the record collection and everything about that story is real. That's something that happened to somebody. And there's true affection and emotion for the characters. which is why they get elevated. That's that alchemy piece. It's like you feel the love, like you're saying, when Reiser walks in and is going through that. We're meeting, you know, Ellen Barkin, and we're like, I mean, I haven't seen this movie in, I don't know, 20 years.
I've only seen it once. That's the
Yeah,
first
I
time I
don't
saw it,
remember.
but I just remember that shot, and I just thought that's amazing to me. So I thought that to me showed this guy's a filmmaker, and
But the trust that he had in his heart, in his memories, and his feelings, and all that stuff. So one of the things, as we were talking, I was thinking about is there's so much money in this game, and there's two problems with building an icon like a Brad Pitt or a Cary Grant or a Tom Cruise or whatever. Number one, it depends on whether or not they've stepped in a pile of shit recently if your $200 million project goes. So you've now put yourself into a political minefield. And then the other thing is, now we're giving that guy so much fucking power that he's going to want like 20% of the back end of Forrest Gump. And he's going to want, you know, like we're making Tom Hanks or T Hanks.
well,
I think we
but
call him
Forrest Gump's a different case because
Hanks.
that's the case where he and Bob's Zemeckis bet their salaries that there's a movie in this, so they took less money up front and put that money into the special effects. I mean, that's
Right.
that's happenstance that ends up building a career. It's like the bet that Lou Wasserman took on Jimmy Stewart in Winchester '73 when he goes, "No, we don't want you to pay him. We're going to take a part of the back end instead." And which is something Cary Grant did. He was a contract player, and
And I think
once he
Clooney,
got free, Cary Grant never took a studio contract and said, "You're going to pay me, you're going to invest in me, and I'm going to get a piece of the back end." It's probably one of the reasons he never won an Oscar for all the time. I'm sure the industry hated that he was a free agent in the days when everybody else was a contract player. John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart and Clark Gable, all those movie stars, Betty Davis, Humphrey Bogart, they were all contract players who, if they didn't play ball, they would be suspended, lent out to another studio, and they wouldn't be paid for the work. And Cary Grant said, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to bet on me." And these are all things that also end up changing the movie business too, because it changes the way the studios do business. And when Wasserman made that bet on when he was Jimmy Stewart's agent, said, "No, we'll do this." And that still continues to happen. You know, the people who have to bet on themselves because nobody else will. You know, I think about, and it amuses me because he's now become a big deal, but he wasn't when I met him. When I had Tyler Perry on the show, and he just telling me, you know, he made a movie that he
I'm
actually
sorry,
bought.
I've never heard of him. Tyler who?
But no,
What an yeah, what a
2000,
story.
in 2005, he made this movie, and the studio wanted to make it in a different way. They bought one of his plays, and they brought in this white guy, forgive me for that turn of phrase, to do a rewrite. And he goes,
I don't
"Well,
take it personally.
this
I'm
isn't."
I'm orange.
I got you. Yeah, Mr. Trump. So anyway, he said that this rewrite by this screenwriter wasn't the play that he sold them. They were changing it and taking it away from it. He goes, "No, it's not going to work." In the theater goes, "What do you mean it's not going to work? I've been taking this play around the country for 5 years. I know where every laugh is and where every tear is. You can't tell me it's not going to work with the audience." And the studio said, "Well, that's a theater audience." He said, "No, this is my audience." So he bought it back from them and did it the way he wanted to do it. And he's telling me, so I'm working on this deal. I said, "What's the deal?" He goes, "Well, I want to make the sitcom, but I think what I'm going to do is take it out in the barter system. So I can just own the time. I'll buy time from TV stations and then I'll sell the commercials myself." He said, "There's this thing that I'm thinking about doing that TBS has said to me, they'll buy these 10 shows from me. So I'm thinking I'm going to tell them they can't just buy 10, they have to buy 100. But it's contingent on these first 10 doing a certain audience number. If it gets this number, they have to buy another 100 shows, another 90 shows for me. I'm going to try it out and see how it works." And I said, "Well, that's interesting. I never heard of that before." Because yeah, I never have either. It's hard work doing this barter stuff. Byron Allen does well with it. Somebody else who does well, but I want to try this other thing. And he changed television. This all these things we're talking about is betting on yourself. And what's become harder and harder as these things become more and more expensive is to bet on talent. You're trying to bet on the whole thing rather than betting on talent. And it's also it's kind of the Moneyball theory. You know, you can do just as well playing a season of baseball if you're strategic about going for singles and doubles as you can trying to get people to hit home runs all the time. And to further torture metaphor, everybody wants everything to be a home run.
Right. Right. So when you, and we'll just duck into the mechanics of the flicks of the net for a moment. When you become a filmmaker yourself and you find yourself in
I'm sorry.
the,
Okay.
well, you find yourself in the maw, the drooling maw of the business of getting the funding. I mean, you made shows before, you've been part of shows, you certainly are friends and have a huge amount of insight. But that's different than when it's you in the seat and you're the point person for making decisions based on, yeah, not just editorially, but how the culture is going to receive it. How, I mean, I'm just so curious. Or do you get this phone call from somebody somewhere that goes, you know, what we'd really love to feel more is that needle drop on this scene or that scene
Actually, I
or the
didn't get. I
music.
mean, I was so lucky. It was like with this thing I did, the team was so good that even if you didn't like it, you couldn't afford to bet against them. It was like, you know, it was like the Pats of 2017.
Well, I
And
just
I'm
have to
not saying
say,
me.
and thank you for inviting me to a screening of uh, Is That Black Enough for You? Because
Yes.
I but I just love saying it like that because it's somebody asked me, oh, what movie are you here to say? And I just turned and I went, is that black enough for you? They're like, I'm sorry, but because they didn't realize that was the title of the movie, and they thought I was just being sort of aggressive and offensive, maybe, um, and maybe just weird. Maybe they thought I was just being weatherly weird. They didn't know, but it's a great title for a movie, and everyone should watch that film, and then you will understand where the title is generated from by watching it. But talk, if you could talk, I know you had to do all those fucking junkets yourself and you had to be on the other side of this. You know, this isn't really, this is you and me doing what we would do with a cigar. So I don't feel like this is that formal a setting. But when you're actually out there having to hawk your goods, you know, you're on the street corner and you're like, look what I got in here. I got a movie. You're going to like this movie. I mean, did you feel that you had to be the salesman, that you had, because it's your baby?
I mean, I felt I had to be honest about it. And I was lucky in the interviews I did with people who knew who I was. I don't think I talked to anybody who didn't know my reputation to the extent that I have one, and what an unusual undertaking this was for me to be a part of. And um, so I was just telling people what it was I had done. And what I was going to say too, and we talked about this, is I was incredibly lucky that I had Steven Soderbergh and David Fincher saying this is of worth. Because I think it would have been a very different thing had I come in on my own, hat in hand, and said, "This is what I want to do." But I was given an enormous amount of leeway, right down to making suggestions about how they cut the trailer and the poster art, and they listened to everything I said because of these guys, who, well, again, took this bet on me, and I was really astonishingly fortunate in that regard, and also to the extent that people I talked to about the film either knew who I was or knew film or both. So there was less of a hurdle for me to have to clear in terms of explaining what it was the film did and what it was I was trying to do with it. And I tried to take a lesson of people like, you know, Van Peebles and Spike Lee, who you could take the story of the making of it and make that part of it too, because then that makes it another kind of phenomenon. You're not just talking about the movie, and just talking about this thing that's missing. I could talk about it as kind of a anthropological thing too. I was just thinking as you were asking that question about how fortunate I was in talking to people who were already simpatico to what it was I was trying to achieve.
The big thing that so I, as you know, got to meet Harry Belafonte in 2019 down in Jamaica, and Sarah Frank, his stepdaughter, uh, was the set designer on the TV show Bull that I was doing. And so I'm down in Jamaica with a bunch of friends. My friend Dan and I are, I, I, I mean, I believe we were just finishing breakfast, and Sarah called me and she was like, "Hey, I'm with Harry over in Orocabesa, and are you cool? Do you want to come over for lunch and meet? He'd love to say hi." It's like, Dale. So I was like, yes, we go. So I got my friend Stevie we jumped in a van, Jamaica style. No spleefs, too early in the morning for that. But we were off and running, and we got out there, and I got to spend time in the company of that dude. And he's a dude. I got to hear some stories that I will not paraphrase out of deep respect for what those stories were about, and also just the man who told them. Those are his stories. But your movie put reframed. I mean, I had my own personal experience, and I had my own knowledge, and I had met him briefly in Vancouver when we were doing Dark Angel, like on the steps of a hotel. Like I shook his hand and told him, with all the drooling adoration of a, idiot boy, which I am prone to do. I mean, I did that to Andy Partridge, who's the lead singer of XTC.
XTC, yeah.
I did it to Elvis Costello when he was recording with Burt Bacharach he was staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And poor Declan McManus, poor Elvis, he's just shuffling through with all of his, notes and everything, trying to find a bungalow. And I just was like, I'm so sorry. I know this is the worst. I have to. And when, to a much lesser degree, if I am ever stopped by anybody because they have watched 300 and something episodes of a crime procedural drama, I am immediately deeply humbled and grateful that anyone has. I'm astonished, right? Because I know how I woke up in the morning, I went and made some television, I got paid, I had a lot of fun, I met some interesting people, I did what I did, but Harry Belafonte moved the needle and was also pissed off about some pretty tectonic stuff. And in your film, it framed it so well for me that I actually knew a new version of Harry after that, of Mr. Belafonte after that. And how, like, was he one of the sort of 7 pillars of wisdom, if you will, of that, construction?
And he was the spine of it, if I can go to another metaphor. It was always going to be built on his back. And I spent a little time with him over the years, including having spent the better part of a week with him in Havana during the Havana Film Festival. And it always had this feeling that he got short shrift, as I felt like Black film in general got short shrift. And there's certain conversations that we never had about it. And I just thought, and I knew that I primed the pump a little bit just by asking some of these questions over the years, that he would be ready. It took so long for this movie to get made that I was terrified as to what his physical state was going to be. And in fact, the day we shot, and as I've told you, you're lucky when your DP for your first day of shooting is Steven Soderbergh. You roll the dice and done pretty well with that. So the day we were going to shoot was the day that Diane Carroll had died. And I said, wow, I know they were friends. And so Steven goes, yeah, what do you think? I went, well, it's kind of always been my experience. If you show up at somebody's house with a camera crew, they generally don't turn you away. He goes, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. That's what we should do. Let's just go and see what happens. And so we get to his apartment and we shoot it, and we shot at his place. It's the only interview we did that we didn't shoot at the movie theater, because, wherever Harry Belafonte's going to be, you go there. And he opens the door and goes, hey, how are you? I go, well, how are you? He goes, yeah, you heard about Diane? I go, yeah. Because, at one point when I was trying to get this movie made earlier, she said she would be a part of it. And then I didn't hear from her. I didn't realize she was ill. He goes, yeah, it's really a shame. Let's go to work. Okay. And then it's a 90-year-old Harry Belafonte. And you wonder what he's going to be like. And the great thing about Harry Belafonte was that when he was 30, he sounded like he was 50. So now he's 90 and he sounds like he's 50. He actually sounds younger because his voice hadn't changed anything, not in power, not in timbre, not in anything. And he still had that same kind of presence. He's a movie star still.
Oh yeah.
And I want there to be some kind of heartbreaking watching this guy who had sacrificed himself for what he thought was the good of his people. I thought that was an extraordinary thing to do, and not something that you would expect from a person who was built to be an actor, who, as a singer, was really an actor. He acted out those songs, and to give him a chance to talk about these things that he'd never really talked about before. I was even remembering there's a New Yorker piece of Skip Gates did in the 90s where it was a respectful profile, but he wasn't taking Harry that seriously as an actor either. And I just thought, you're not seeing who he was as an actor if you're doing that, because I just remember the impact of the movie, that the clip we have, Odds Against Tomorrow, where he's such a, when you see that movie, he's such a movie star that even the elevator operator is hitting on him in this apartment building. And that he is clearly in his own right such a star and can't get a break because of the racial politics of the time. That makes that movie even all the more awful to behold, but that much more powerful because that's an implicit part of the drama and an explicit part of the drama. And that incredible clip where the first time I ever saw Richard Bright, Alan Neary from The Godfather.
Oh yeah, I did a movie with Richard Bright.
That must have been great because
I got to do a scene with, I got to do a scene where he was running a pawn shop and I was buying a gun, and he had this monologue and it was written on a board behind me. And he goes, "This gun, you want to buy this?" He was like William Hickey. You know, he's like, "This fucking gun, you're going to buy this gun. Let me tell you about guns. In this goddamn country, anybody wants to do anything." And he had this whole speech about gun ownership. There's a movie called Trigger Happy made by my friend Julian West. And it was like an IFC original movie. Yeah. Remember the 90s when there were like those
indie movies, independent film? Yes,
oh my God. But Richard Bright, anyway, you just brought that back to me because he passed away, I think not long after that movie came out back in the 90s. But he was
hit by a bus.
Yeah, that's right.
Crossing a street. But that first time I ever saw him in a movie, in fact, Odds Against Tomorrow was the first film he ever did, is when he walks up and cruises Harry Belafonte, and the movie's not judging him for that. It's such an extraordinary set of circumstances in that film. And I thought, to do something like that where you're that good, and you've got these great scenes with Robert Ryan, who loved Harry Belafonte so much that he didn't want to play another like unrepentant racist again, but he thought for this movie and the chance to work with Harry Belafonte, he would do it.
Right.
And he was tired of playing villains and stuff. They weren't very demanding roles, and he wanted.
I'm trying to remember who did the music again.
The Modern Jazz Quartet.
It's the most unbelievable soundtrack. Odds Against Tomorrow. It's like a bananas soundtrack.
I've got it sitting. I got the original United Artists pressing of it sitting right here in my office. But yeah, all these
like on an infinite loop. You could put that thing on an infinite loop, and you'd be okay on your desert island.
And then Harry learned to play the vibe, so he could look like he knew what he was doing there. And,
that's right.
And for that movie to not make him a star, when we're talking about movie stars, and he took this better stuff. He went out and found the financing and produced the movie because nobody was going to make it, and he couldn't go through another experience like The World of Flesh and the Devil, where there's 3 people left on the planet, and the white one's not going to sleep with him because he's black. Going, what's going on? I mean,
Julia Roberts, Denzel, Julia. Here we go.
Oh my! But there's stories about there's stories about the making of that movie too, which I will tell you at some point because I don't want to get sued.
No. But, and Alan Pakula, rest in peace. We don't. And there's no.
But it's also a thing that people will tell you that even the studios, and this is maybe one of the great things about the Netflixification of the world, is that there were exhibitors who would not take that movie if they had them kissing in the 90s. I mean,
unbelievable.
There are any number of black actors who would tell me that they had love scenes with white actors, with white women, and they wouldn't shoot them because they couldn't get the movies booked into the South in the 90s. So, I'm sure there were any number of compromises that were made in that film so that this picture would get booked in the movie theaters. And what Netflix can do now is not worry about that kind of stuff anymore. Maybe that's one of the good things about that, is not having to wait for, there aren't as many gatekeepers as there used to be. So movies can get made that force us to ask questions that wouldn't have happened even 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. I remember, I'll never forget this, going to the only exhibitor screening I'd ever been to of this movie Duplicity with Julia Roberts and Clive Owen. And I remember walking out, and there's a guy taking a cigar out of his pocket as if he was going to light it in the elevator in this building in Midtown Manhattan. He must have been 90, balding. Well, by balding, I mean he had like a three-hair comb over with dandruff like the side of my thumbnail, going, "Yeah, I wouldn't sleep with her." I went,
Oh, jeez.
"You had the chance to sleep with Julia Roberts?" No, 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 no. So what are you talking about? That, oh, this is the kind of mentality that kept movies, certain kinds of movies, from getting made. And so, to the good of the world, maybe having streamers around who can make the kinds of movies and not be forced to answer to distributors, because they don't care, and they can actually change the way people think by making us comfortable with gender distinctions and not making a big deal about ethnic differences. And maybe that's one of the good things to be said about all this, because there used to be a time where that there was division in the legislative houses all the time, but they've come to a compromise. They realize, if you give me this, I can give you that, and listening and compromise, I guess, is what grown-ups do.
Right. And that compartmentalization to go, if we get to the point where we emotionally, intellectually compartmentalize, we can literally live on one side of a garden wall and have a picnic with our family, while on the other side of that wall, atrocities take place that we just ignore and pretend aren't there. And I think that it's that integration that something like In the Zone is ultimately about. It's like the danger of humanity is that we go so far away from each other. Even if it's a marriage, is it good for the kids? It's like we are constantly, as human beings, struggling to find that connection and that shared experience, because ultimately we're born alone, we die alone, we have this homunculus in our mind that is a survivor that has to take care of me and me and me. But we are part of we. And who is we? Is it the tribal we, or is it the collective we? Is it the human we? I think that's the job for me of the stories that have brought me, the movies especially. I love TV shows and I love all that stuff, but a movie is a dream that just. I watched Lawrence of Arabia the other day, and I mean, I finished that thing, and I think I just sat there for 15 minutes just going, like, I couldn't move. I was like, I saw it for the first time in a long time, and I saw a different version of the movie. I saw a new movie. And that's the magic of cinema. And anyway, I won't do one of those classic Elvis Mitchell wrap-ups, because I know that you own those. So what I will say is thank you for joining me on this little adventure, or an exploration of your career.
Oh, gee, now we ended it with my two favorite words, career and exploration, simultaneously.
Well,
in the same sentence, I should say, concurrently.
I'm gonna end this with a quote, if you don't mind, because I was thinking about you, and I was thinking about how we met, and the wonderful synchronicity of things. And so I'm going to read this. This is Lucretius. You'll know the quote. But when atoms are traveling straight down through empty space by their own weight of quite indeterminate times and places, they swerve ever so little from their course, just so much that you would call it a change of direction. If it were not for this swerve, everything would fall downwards through the abyss of space. No collision would take place, and no impact of atom on atom would be created. Thus, nature would never have created anything. 1,000 Years of Nonlinear History, MIT Press. Anyway, that's the way I feel. You and I, we had a nice little swerve and we bumped atoms, and you are a beautiful man and a wonderful friend, and I appreciate you deeply, as I
Appreciate
always
you
say. And
too. Thanks so much for this work. Thanks so much, man.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, Elvis.